Wait. Hold the music. Hold it. Oh, there we go. Okay. So welcome back to Enemy of the Surveillance State, where we discuss news tips and open source tools to help you protect your privacy in an age of mass digital surveillance. I am your host, C. Mitchell Shaw. Don't have time to do this over the intro music because my intro music's only so long. So I wanted to explain this episode. I was this week or last week a guest on the Ward Scott Files. Ward Scott is a great patriot, a former college professor who runs a YouTube channel and his own website and does a podcast called the Ward Scott Files. And he's down in the piney woods of Florida, had me on as a guest where we discussed privacy. And being the greedy capitalist pig that I am, I asked Ward if I could capitalize on his show and take the audio from that show, because I just really enjoyed our conversation, and share that as today's episode. And he graciously said that I could do that. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to where you can find the Ward Scott Files. He's just got some really good stuff on there. He talks a lot about a lot of things that are going on. His sort of bailiwick, his shtick is not so much about privacy, but because that relates to liberty, he has had me on as a guest so that we could have that conversation. And now I want to share that with you. So cue the intro, and here we go.
My guest, Mitchell Shaw, whom you first met when I was out and Tim Martin was the show host. And Mitchell was a very impressive guest. He has joined us today. His expertise really, as he has said to me, is privacy, and he's been researching quite a bit. But before we get down the road of privacy, which we'll never get off of because we've lost it, I wanted to share some information with you about an update I got yesterday about Zuckerbucks. Now, you know, we covered Zuckerbucks here in Alachua County with our supervisor elections. There were about $400,000 or $500,000 that were gifted in a so-called grant, which didn't need much auditing. And that got spent by the discretion of the Democrat supervisor elections. Well, it turns out there is a very close to a perfect match of Democratic advantage counties and Zuckerberg's supervisor election grants. We have done some research on this. Some people at Politico have helped do this research, and we've made the news, of course, at Politico and Newsmax with this issue. And that doesn't surprise any of us. How do it know? How do it know where to put the money? And it didn't succeed overall in the state of Florida, but, we don't know about the votes on down the line. For example, particularly the Secretary of Agriculture here, which was really snafu, sort of surprise. So just thought I'd start off the conversation today with giving you that update that there is very close to a perfect match of Democratic advantage counties and Zuckerberg supervisor election grants. Duval and Orange got left out, and Brevard, Hernando Lake, and Wakulla snuck in. So there you are. That's from the 2020 presidential Florida results. I want to introduce Mitchell Shaw to you. He is coming to us from his studio in North Carolina today. So, Mitch, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, Ward. It's great to be back on the show. Thanks for having me, brother.
Well, thanks for coming on and being such a team player here in our study, if you will, coming at always from the professor point of view, if you will, the issues that are concerning all of us. And I've just done a little bit of research, and I'll maybe use this as a kind of a springboard for us to talk about. It's quite an issue. Pew Research has taken a look at this, and 6 in 10 U.S. adults say they do not think it's possible to go through daily life without having data collected about them by companies or the government. 81% of the public says that the potential risks they face because of data collection by companies outweighs the benefits. Just jumping around here, and I'm sure you'll have a response for all these. Fully 90% of Americans say they're never asked to approve privacy policies. They just do it and they don't really understand it. Reading it doesn't mean they have read it thoroughly or understand it. There's a general lack, and this is one place we may look at and start with. Of course, it's your expertise here. There's a general lack of understanding about data privacy laws among the general public. Have you found that to be the case, Mitchell?
Oh my gosh. Ward, the very first episode of my podcast, which is called Subtly Enemy of the Surveillance State, because I didn't want to wear it right on my sleeve, right? So I called my show Enemy of the Surveillance State because I did, all kidding aside, I wanted to indicate right up front, they have made themselves our enemies. It's time that we acknowledge the role that we play as their enemies. If we love and value privacy, then we have become enemies of the surveillance state. So, but in the very first episode, I dealt with this question because this is the question I get all the time. Mitch, I don't have anything to hide. Why do I care if they're, cataloging my browsing history and my searches? Why do I care if they see my emails and texts? I'm not doing anything. I don't have anything to hide. And, it's when you talked about accepting terms of service and what have you, I forget what your number was, 6 out of 10 or something like that you just read, that said that they either don't understand it or don't remember explicitly giving permission for that data collection. That's not surprising. There was a comedian a while back that did this bit on installing software. And he was like, yeah, you're like, approve. At first you're reading it, right? But 3 pages in, you're just like, approve. And then it catches you. It's like, oh, that's right. Scroll down, approve. Firstborn child, sure, approve. Because at this point you're invested. You just want to install the stupid piece of software and get on with the task that you were trying to perform. And these are called click contracts and different things like that. But basically it's that you just click a button. And here's the thing, Microsoft's terms of service are a perfect example of this. I forget how many thousands of words. I think it's 41,000 words. If you printed it, it would be 110 pages. 110 pages. And it's written in legalese. What people would really have to do if they wanted to actually give consent, because consent implies understanding. I cannot truly consent to that which I do not fully understand. I think most people would agree on that. Even the left, even the snowflakes agree on that where sexuality is concerned, right? That consent, right? So, if I'm drunk, I can't consent. If I'm drugged, I can't consent. If I don't understand the legalese behind these documents, is that really consent? Did I enter into a contractual agreement, legally speaking, that allows Microsoft or Facebook or whoever to harvest my data? Can I do that unless I really understand it? So what people would need to do is they would need to hire an attorney, Ward, to sit down beside them while they go through these contracts, because that's what it is. Basically, terms of service or a contract, and you're saying, I agree, right? So you'd have to hire an attorney at $1,800 an hour to sit beside you as you scroll through this stuff and explain to you exactly what you're giving up versus what you're gaining if you click I agree. And I think if most people did that, they simply wouldn't agree, because Microsoft's terms of service, using it just as an example again, at the end of all of that, what you wind up with is Microsoft has gained your permission. If you're using any Microsoft product at all, whether it's Windows operating system, Microsoft Office, Microsoft email, any of that stuff, anything, if it's a Microsoft product and you've agreed to their terms of service, you have agreed that they own your data and they're just kind enough to let you use it. And I'm not exaggerating at all. On a Windows computer, by the way, they actually have the right because you clicked I agree. So they assert the right, I'll put it that way. They assert the right to browse the files on your computer, make copies of those on their servers, and share them if they have, quote, a good faith reason to believe that doing so is necessary, right? They can also browse the files on your computer and delete anything that they think they should delete. I've heard multiple stories of people who play a lot of games, gamers, they're called, and they will wake up one morning and go to fire up a game they were just playing yesterday and find that it's simply no longer on their computer because Microsoft suspected that they had a pirated copy of that game. So Microsoft just deleted it from their computer while they were asleep at night.
Amazing.
So, yeah, these are our big tech masters. And before we move on, I assume that next we're going to move into the Zuckbucks thing.
Yes, sir. We can definitely go there.
So we have to ask ourselves, what are they doing with these? Because they don't harvest our data because they're just nosy. They are nosy. But beyond that, it is so that they can share this information with their partners who pump ads your way every time you turn around, right? It's all about the great green God. It's all about making that buck. And so you're using these products and services for free, usually. Now, you pay for Microsoft Windows. You have to pay for Microsoft Office. But a lot of these services, Facebook, Twitter, these things are free, right? You don't pay to use them. But when you're all done using them, what you find out is that the product is not the product. Your data are the products, right? And data is plural. So I know I sound insane saying data are, but there we go. Your data, that's what they're after. They're after your data because they can sell that multiple times to different partners and make all this money. So the question is, what are they doing with the money that they make out of stealing your data and selling it off piece by piece? Well, Mark Zuckerberg, to the tune of $9 million in Wisconsin alone, was using it to bribe voters. That's what a special counsel in Wisconsin said about Zuckbucks. They want to charge Mark Zuckerberg and his foundation, as it were, with violating bribery laws as it relates to voting in Wisconsin. So that's part of what they're doing with all this money that they're harvesting from harvesting your data. They're just raking in this money. Look at Google. Google makes billions and billions of dollars a year giving away their services. Nobody pays for Google services. Oh, you may have upgraded your Google Drive to a larger capacity or something like that, but you can use Google Maps, Google Calendar, OK Google on your phone. You can use all these things for free. You can do web searches for free. All of this stuff is free. They give away Chromebooks to schools all over the country. Why are they doing this? How can they give all that stuff away and make billions of dollars? Because the stuff isn't the point. Data is the point.
Data has become such a ubiquitous word that we just hired a new basketball coach here. And the feature of his approach to the game is data driven.
Oh, yes.
The first coach, Mitch, I've heard that used to describe his coaching philosophy. I guess it's a time that's come, and the college and university here is proudly saying, wow, we now have a competitive edge. We've got a data-driven basketball coach. We also have the same talk about our new football coach. That's data-driven. Everything is studied. Every habit, every tendency is anticipated and addressed without perhaps even the player knowing that the player has that behavior, which is most interesting because the data-driven observer knows more about the behavior of the player than the player knows about him or herself. And then we're able to mold, if you will, And this coaching world is a particularly interesting place to focus for a moment since it's all over the news. We're able then to focus on tailor making an attractive package for this individual. And I'll tell you where it's come into play, Mitch. We now have something called the transfer portal. And these athletes no longer are they're not tied to the coach who recruited them. If they don't like that college, they can enter that transfer portal and leave and go to another one. Furthermore, they can advertise themselves in what's called name, image, or likeness, and they can actually auction themselves off to the highest bidder. And so this has become the way in which college athletics is being conducted right now. And it's even drifting down into the high school athletic world. And it's all, quote unquote, data driven.
It's funny, Ward, because when you talked about and look, I want to say from the outset before I even address that, data by itself is amoral. It's neither here nor there. It's neither right nor wrong. I compare things like this to a hatchet. If I use a hatchet to chop firewood for my grandmother, then the hatchet is a very good thing. If I use that same hatchet to chop my grandmother, then the hatchet is a very bad thing. But the hatchet hasn't changed at all. Right. It's all about whose hands it's in and what they're doing with it, right? So data all by themselves, data just, and I'll singularize that so that I don't sound insane. I'll say data all by itself. But data all by itself is neither here nor there. It's so if you've got a basketball coach that says, well, look, we're going to look at the video from the last 11 games, and we're going to look at what we're doing differently, and then we're going to also really look at these other teams and see what they're doing, and then come up with a plan. Maybe that makes sense. Where it gets creepy is one thing you said a moment ago, that it may be habits that those players themselves don't even know they have. And in that, going back again to that very first episode of my podcast, the title of that, by the way, was Why Surveillance Matters, Even If You Have Nothing to Hide, right? One of the things that I point out in that is that they are able to create a startlingly accurate profile of who you actually are. Because maybe, Ward, maybe you're a better person than I am. I doubt that when I say what I'm about to say, okay? But maybe you never actually lie to yourself about your own motives or ambitions. I do. We don't know ourselves, right? But the data knows us, because the data doesn't listen to our excuses or our ostensible reasons for why we do what we do. The data just know what we do, right? So when you've got these people that have the ability to harvest that data and read it for what it is, and they've got algorithms that crunch that data and return back to them an answer about your personality, your beliefs, your desires, your ambitions, even your thoughts that you may not even be honest with yourself about, the machine suddenly knows you better than you know yourself. And the guy that controls the machine has his hands on that information about you.
We have a question coming in, and I suspect the answer is yes. Is mass surveillance increasingly the norm?
It is. In fact, I wrote an article for the New American Magazine. Oh my gosh, Ward, this would have been back in like 2014 or 15. And I forget the judge's name now. It'll come to me, but I can't remember his name now. He is cited. He is known as, quote, the most cited jurist in the 21st century, but I can't think of his name. He said, point blank, privacy is overrated. What? Have you got something to hide? Right? And as a generation comes up, because here's one thing interesting to think about. September 11th was 21 years ago, Ward.
Yes.
9/11 was 21 years ago. So 21 years ago, the world changed. 21 years ago, we all who were older by then knew what it was to live in a world where privacy was the norm. If you've grown up since 9/11, 2001, since the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and that field in Pennsylvania, if you've grown up since then, you've never known privacy and you've never really known freedom. You've never known what it is not to have to get naked scanned or groped at the airport. And you've never known what it is not to expect that your email communications, your phone calls, your texts, and everything else are being monitored and surveilled. So yeah, I think it has become a norm. But the corollary to that, for the person asking the question, the corollary to that is that there's actually more pushback now than there ever has been. Because as that surveillance has come more and more into the light, thank God for Ed Snowden. And, think what you want to about Ed Snowden. I think he's a hero. I don't agree with everything about him. His moral life is kind of weird. Okay. I'm not a big Ed Snowden fan, but I'm a big fan of what Ed Snowden did to reveal for the rest of us what our government was doing that I'm not a fan of. So this might be an instance of my enemy's enemy is my friend. But in this case, I think Ed Snowden's probably a decent guy. But because of that, there is more pushback as more people are becoming aware. My podcast sort of breaks some rules, and I don't think it's because I produce such a great podcast. I don't think it's because I'm so riveting and interesting. I don't think it's that. I think that the content that I'm addressing is something people are so hungry for that because when we moved here to North Carolina, I wound up going 5 months without posting an episode of what's supposed to be a weekly podcast. So for my listeners out there, thanks for staying around. But one day in those 5 months, Ward, I had 0 downloads. Every other day, I plugged along like I was posting episodes. People were still downloading material that was a year old to listen to it. It's something that people want to know how to protect their privacy. So it has become the norm, but at the same time, because people recognize that, there's a little bit of pushback, and that's an increasing amount of pushback with people trying to figure out what they can do. Just do a search, go online and do an internet search for de-Google my life, de-Googled phone, de-Googled this, de-Googled that. It pops up everywhere. Everybody is looking for this.
We have another question, and I don't know the answer to this. It's very early in the ball game here. What happens when you connect the surveillance states, knowing the individual with smart munitions in a hot war? I'm not sure I understand that question. Let me see if it's more to it. Do you understand that, Mitch?
I don't think I do understand the question. Can you read it again?
What happens when you connect the surveillance states, quote, knowing the individual, end quote, with smart munitions in a hot war? Nothing good is my prediction. I'm not sure what that means.
Okay, so the first part of that question is, what do we do with the surveillance states being able to know people? The fact that the surveillance state can know people better than they know themselves,
right? And
then the idea of smart munitions in a hot war. I don't know that they've yet got bullets that have your DNA on them that they could just turn that thing loose, like in that old movie with Richard Simmons. Gene Simmons played in a movie back in the 80s, the guy from Kiss, the guitar player from Kiss or whatever. No, he was the singer. Played in a movie back in the 80s where they had these bullets that were trained to your DNA, and they could just pull the trigger and that bullet would go find you no matter where you were. Now, I don't know that we've got that, but can they target? I mean, we've got with the technological capabilities we've got right now, we could put a missile into the tailpipe of somebody's car if we wanted to. I mean, not hit their car, hit their tailpipe. I know we could, right? So when they know what they know about us, could we become targets? Sure. I don't want to be an alarmist, and I don't want to sound like an alarmist, because one thing about sounding like an alarmist is it doesn't even matter if you're right. You still just sound like an alarmist, right? There is a difference between eye contact and a piercing maniacal stare when you're sharing information with people. And I try to avoid the latter. So, but I will say that I am concerned, and I think everyone should be concerned about the idea that you could become that other group, right? So throughout history, and here's all you got to look at, just throughout history, once we other someone, and I'm using the word other there as a verb to mean we turn them into something different from us. And we saw this very recently. If you weren't vaccinated, you were other, right? You
Right.
were outside of society looking in, you with your face pressed up against the glass. Oh, this looks fun in there. I wish I could join in, right? So once we other someone, we can just dispatch them at will. Hitler was able to do that with the Jews by and large. He was able to do that with Catholics by and large. And we see this throughout history. It's not just Hitler. Hitler's a great example. We always pick on him, and not that he doesn't deserve it, the heck with him. But at the same time, there are many other examples. Stalin was great at that throughout history, not even recent history, but go back as far as you want to go. When Rome burned and it was blamed on the Christians, they were made other, and the persecutions were able to crank up exponentially. So if we find ourselves in the group of other, then we ought to be concerned. And it's going to be a little late then to learn to communicate privately. So my advice is to learn that stuff now and hope that it's like a life insurance policy or a seatbelt or a fire extinguisher. Hey, I've got it and I know how to use it, but it's never come in handy. Let's hope that's the case, right? But that's not the case, because it comes in handy every time you communicate privately, because that's one more conversation, that's one more web search, that's one more website that you visited, one more document that you wrote or read that they don't know about, that doesn't go into the profile that they are creating about you. That's just one thing they don't know. So when I started, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to refresh everybody. What we're talking to Mitchell Shaw here, who has really been on the show before with Tim Martin, who is writes for New American and other publications, has his own podcast. And we're really featuring a discussion today. I wanted Mitchell to chime in on this because he's been studying it a long time. And that is what is really going on in our society with these algorithms and privacy and data collection and all the above. Questions coming in quite furiously here. You can get me at 352-325-3938. We'll go another 5 minutes. I'll take a break and come back. So anything you got on your mind, also reading the Facebook chat. One of the things that I've been asked I'll give you a story, Mitch. I'm sure you know, but I was sitting in the car. I was sitting actually in my truck one day with a guy, let's put it this way. He is really good at surveillance, human surveillance. I mean, he's a guy that mostly nobody knows about, and he can gather habits by human eye. He does it, but he is kind of reporting to me. And we were sitting in a parking lot of all places at Walmart with all these other cars around us. And he looked at me and he says, I really don't want to talk here. Do you have Siri on your radio? I said, well, sure. I said, well, Siri can hear other things too. And, we've got Alexa and all these things. Is there truth to that? Can those devices listen in on us?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you two quick stories. Now we've got how long till the break?
Oh, well, we can take the break when we want to, so we'll take it after.
Okay. Well, then I will tell you both of these stories. So one is personal. I was sharing some of this information with a friend years ago who shall remain nameless. And he said, "Oh, come on, Mitch." I was like, no, because we weren't even talking about Siri. We're talking about that like OK Google thing on your phone, right? Like if you've got an Android phone and you've got now I think it's called Google Assistant or something like that. But back in the day, it was just OK Google. And so you would just say OK Google and bloop, bloop, and you'd say, how many inches are there in a mile? And Google would come back and just list all these results for you on the screen of your phone. Unlike Siri, Google didn't answer you out loud way back then. I don't mess with Google products anymore. I think Google Assistant now actually speaks out loud to you, right? But so what I said to my friend was, I said, listen, how does it know you said OK Google? He said, because it listens for that phrase. I said, stop. It listens. He's like, Mitch, you're making too much of it. I said, okay, let me show you something. Let me show you something. So went over to his computer, and I had him log into his Google account, and then I started poking around inside his Google account. Now, not google.com. It's something.google.com / a million other things. And they keep moving it around because they're required to make this data available to you but they're not going to make it easy for you to find it, right? So we dug around for about 10 minutes, and I finally found the recordings that they had from his phone. And you hear a lot of, I don't know, let me find out. Okay, Google, because it has to be listening before you say, okay, Google, right? It has to be, or it doesn't know you said, okay, Google. So that first couple of seconds before that are part of the recording that they store, right? So you hear a lot of him going, I don't know, let me find out. Okay, Google. And then you hear one where he says to his wife, if you'll shut up for a second, I'll find out. And I played that out loud on his computer.
No.
And I said, Google knows that you tell your wife to shut up. I didn't even know that. I thought y'all got along just fine, right? So just like that, he was like, okay, maybe I do say and do some things that I would like to keep private, right? Right. So the other one, and this didn't happen to me, but I wrote about it years ago. Alexa. There was a story about a woman and her husband. Now, her husband owns some kind of construction company that has subsidiaries and employees all across the country, probably sales folk that go around and help him sell his product, right? So this man and his wife are having a conversation in their home. Now, it's important, before I go any further, to say that the article stated that they had an Alexa Dot. That's the little satellite thing that you can put in different rooms that communicates back to your main Alexa unit. They had a Dot in every room in their house. Let that sink in. That means their bedroom. That means their bathrooms. That's just weird. Do not bug your own bedroom. Do not bug your own bathroom. That's just weird. But they did. And they're having this conversation. And then his phone rings. And it's one of his employees halfway across the country. And he says, hold on a second. Let me get this. Let me see what this guy needs. And the guy says, your Alexa device, it just sent me your conversation. He said, what? No. And he said, yeah, I got it as an MP3 file. And he said, no. He said, y'all are talking about hardwood floors and what types of hardwood floors. And he quoted back to him parts of the conversation. The guy turns to his wife, says, you need to hear this, puts it on speakerphone. And the guy starts reiterating more of what he's just heard. And the wife gets up from the conversation while the guy is still talking, walks to every room in the house, unplugs those gosh darn things, and shoves them in a box, right? By the time, now, initially, Google was like, no, that couldn't have happened. And then Google was like, well, it was a glitch. And the Google was like, we're glad to give you back your money on all those devices if you'll just leave us alone, right? Because everybody was talking about this for a minute there. And that's the problem. It's for a minute. But the convenience of being able to say, Alexa, dim the lights in the living room. Yeah. Alexa, play my favorite song. The convenience of that is something for which too many people are still willing to give up their privacy. But I think that illustrates that absolutely. So here's what had happened in that. Finally, Amazon got back to them and explained their best guess at what happened. Something in their conversation sounded to Alexa like, Alexa, send this conversation to so-and-so, to which Alexa is supposed to respond, send conversation to so-and-so, and they would have had to say yes. Now, they went back and listened to the recordings, and they can't find anything that sounds like that. But the very fact that Alexa is programmed to be able to do that means that you don't have control, not even over your own conversations, if they're being had in the presence of a device that is designed to listen and record and connect to the internet. Just think about that combination. This thing can listen to me, it has the ability to record what I'm saying, and it is connected to the outside world through the internet. My conversation can go anywhere. Think about smart TVs. They don't just have microphones. Some of those things have cameras, because with some of these smart TVs, I can change stations by going like this in front of the camera. or I
True.
can raise the volume or lower the volume, right? I can do all that
True.
from the camera. That means there's a camera that
True.
sees me in my living room, watching the ball game in my underwear while I drink my fifth beer within 2 hours or whatever I'm doing, right? The television that sees me and my wife sitting on the couch watching a movie together when I lean over to kiss her on the cheek or whatever, right? That's just weird. And the answer is absolutely they see it, absolutely they hear it. Now, is that a human being somewhere doing that? No, that's not some guy in a fedora wearing a pair of headphones, smoking a cheap cigar in the basement of your apartment building. No, that's not what's happening. But what is happening is worse than that. A computer is cataloging all of that for later when they can
Exactly.
put it all together into a bigger picture and know that you are the enemy, or
You're
at least know your weaknesses.
in the other category. Yeah, in the category called other.
You're other.
Yeah.
You are other, and they know your weak spots because they know you better than you know yourself, and you don't think you've got weak spots, but they know you do.
Talking Mitchell Shaw here. We'll be back in a moment. We'll have to thank our sponsors and thank our donors, and we'll be continuing this conversation. I'm checking the chat line and the hotline 352-325-3938 for anything you want us to pass along and talk about. We will obviously not exhaust this subject. We'll just scratch the surface, but it's surface is pretty interesting because it suggests it's kind of like an iceberg. 9/10 of the mass of the iceberg is beneath the surface of the water. You only see the top 1/10. That's sort of where we are right now until we find a Mitchell Shaw or somebody who really studies this stuff and can talk about it with some expertise. Yours truly has some suspicions, as you do, I'm sure, and we'll try to get into the validity of those, and it might be more alarming than you even suspected. We'll be right back on the Ward Scott Files in just a moment. A couple of things that come to my mind, Mitch, is you talking about the internet. I remember the first conversation I ever had with it was a former student of mine, and we were sitting in a restaurant, and we were just chatting, and he had grown up and become an employee of the university, and he was in the research world over there, and he said to me, and I couldn't imagine what he was talking about. He said, Ward, can you imagine the world with a spider web of light all over it? And I said, what are you talking about? A spider web of light all over the world? He said, yeah, it's going to be called the internet. And in the beginning advertisements of that, Mitch, I still remember there was a young female figure that would step out of a kind of a gray background, bland gray background with a black kind of cape and hat on, and then step back into it, who was advertising the arrival of the internet. And looking back on it, I recall it now as wow. And that, I suppose, the first memory of it I can remember of it coming into our college and taking the typewriters off our desks was probably around the early 80s. I think maybe that's when we began to transition into, until then we had the big mainframes and they kept all the data and everything. Then we got this pocket-sized thing, and now we've got it boiled down to our handheld phone. And I often go to what I would term international events like the U.S. Open, which is truly an international event. People from all over the world come to watch the players from all over the world. And I'll be darned that you've seen this too. If not, every single person walking has got his or her nose in the phone. I mean, it is the most, it is everywhere. And then you factor in all the different languages and you factor in all the different communication systems, and this spider web of light comes to mind. That's my comment. I guess it's just a social observation. I don't know what else to do with the observation, but that it's certainly become everywhere is what every nook and cranny.
Absolutely. And I have a random observation, a social observation. So often, and I even do it, everybody does it, we use the term or the words internet and web interchangeably. But the internet and the World Wide Web are not the same thing. And the easiest way to understand it, because people ask me this all the time, well, then what's the difference? What's the difference between the internet and the web? And the easy way to understand that is, let's look at the word internet. We start with the word network. So at your university, when you first got computers there, they were all networked together. You mentioned a mainframe, right? So
Right.
you could have shared a file with someone on the other side of the building, but you couldn't reach outside the building, right? So that's a network. Well, the internet is an internetwork. It's a network of networks. It's just the ability for computers to communicate with each other all across the world. The web are the websites that are built on using the internet to connect to the web, right? So think of the internet as hardware and the web as software. So you have to have the hardware, the ability to network together with all these computers so that you can reach out to a server somewhere that has a piece of software on it that shows you this video or shows you the newamerican.com or shows you coca-cola.com or whatever else. And so that's the difference between the internet and the web. And I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. I have always loved technology. I was that kid in 1982 or 3 when everybody got digital watches for Christmas that year, and some of them had video games on it. You could play Pac-Man. You could play Pac-Man on your wrist, like you need that. But everybody got digital watches that year for Christmas, and during recess, I was standing over to the side with a line of kids coming up to me. They're all handing me their watches, and I'm setting up their watches and handing them back to them. I've always been that kid. You got a VCR in 1984, and in 1987 it was still flashing 12 because you didn't know how to program the darn thing. I don't know if you remember that, right? Yeah. Everybody's house you went in, their VCR was flashing 12, so they couldn't record their programs while they were away because you had to program the VCR first. So I'd come over to your house, and 5 minutes later, your clock is correct, and you can record Days of Our Lives while you're at work tomorrow, like you need to record Days of Our Lives. But whatever. General Hospital was way better. Anyway, all soap operas are stupid. And if you watch soap operas, I didn't mean to offend you, but that's still true. But so I've always loved technology. I've just always done this. And I'm not anti-tech. I want to control the tech that I use, right? Because if you don't control it, if someone else does, then they are in control. And once your data leave your hands, they've left your control.
Well, we got a question too that's kind of a spin-off of that, and I've always wondered this too. It's the old riddle, curse or a blessing. We've got this whole generation of youngins who have never made change on their own, if you will. I'm serious.
Oh,
go to the store.
We're going to talk about all my little hot button issues today, aren't we, Ward? Okay. So my mother managed businesses, small businesses, restaurants, gas stations, things like that. My whole childhood, that's what my mom did. And in fact, a couple of instances of her owning her own restaurant. And from the time I was probably 7 or 8 years old, certainly by the time I was 8, I could count back change from $100 bill because I was taught. Okay, it was $13.25. So you hand them 75 cents and you say 14, 15, 25, 35, 45, 55, on up like that, right? You count back the change and you wind up back at 95, 100. They gave you 100. You've given them back the balance of 100 minus 13.75 or whatever it was. And I've just always known how to do that. You go now and just as a social experiment, like nobody pays with cash anymore. So first you're going to be weird the moment you do this. The moment you pay with cash, everybody's going to look at you like you're crazy. But your viewers, your listeners should do this. The next time you go somewhere, pay in cash, make it a habit to do this once in a while, and say, for instance, it's $19.85 or it's $13.75. Hand them a $20 bill, right? After they've hit the button and they're ready to give you back the change, go, oh, wait, I've got 25 cents here, and watch them. They can't do it. They can't. Their mind just melts down on the spot. They're like, they will either get your change wrong, or they'll pull out their phone to fire up a calculator, or they'll call the manager over there. But once in a blue moon, they'll just go, oh, okay, and hand you back the correct change. In all likelihood, they're getting ready to mess up because they can't do it. They've never had to. They didn't learn to do it. And in fact, I hear people now say things like, your change is $13 with 25 cents. What is with 20 and how about and 25 cents? That would be great. Because and is the decimal. We learned this in school. You don't say $1,325. You say $1,325 and however many cents, because and is the decimal. But I digress.
So the larger question is somebody, a brainiac, has picked up on right away. Has this resulted in a loss of stimulation, critical thinking skills, and has this dumbed down education? It's really a deep hole here we're digging now to get into.
Yeah, my wife was ahead of this curve. I was a little slow on the uptake. My early on, my wife was like, "Look, I don't want," because we've always homeschooled our kids. I don't want the kids on computers until they're a certain age, right? I want them doing everything tactile, actual books, actual pencils, actual pens, until they're older, and whatever age we chose that to be for each of them, and then slowly work them into using computers for specific tasks. But as far as like everything is done all day long on a computer, someone recently, it wasn't recently, it was a couple of years ago now, did a study because I don't know if you know this. You remember Legos, Lego blocks? They're still around.
Right,
They're a big deal.
Right.
Legos aren't going anywhere. Because you got to leave something on the floor for Dad to step on at 3:00 in the morning, right? So Legos are a big deal. But Lego, the company, actually now there's a Lego app and a Lego website, and there are Lego software products that you can buy where you, quote, build Legos on a screen, right? So they turned a bunch of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, I think it was 3, 4, and 5-year-olds loose, building with all this Lego stuff. And the things that these kids would be able to build on the screen was pretty cool. Then they handed those kids Legos. They couldn't do it, Ward.
Really?
They could not do in real life what they had literally just been doing on the screen because they didn't understand the spatial relationship between this Lego and that Lego, the depth, the width. They just couldn't put it together. Once they actually started building with straight up Legos, they were able to build with straight up Legos. But the screen, what happened on the screen did not translate to what happens in the real world. And I think that's probably true across the board with a lot of these things, Ward. And so that was a good question from your viewer there. Yeah, I think it has dumbed people down. I think we've reached a place where we are wiring the brain toward virtualness, not realness, right? We can see it on the screen. And there's a dangerous element, a dangerous moral element in that too. Because on a video game, I can do anything I want to anybody else on the video game. That's just pixels on a screen. But once I've encoded that and I take that same attitude and that same behavior into the world, right? We used to talk about road rage, right? Road rage is when there's nothing between you and the person that you're screaming and yelling at except a piece of glass, your windshield. You would never act that way in the grocery store with a shopping cart. Why do you act that way with a car? Because you've separated yourself from that person by, a few millimeters of glass and some air in between, and then another few millimeters of glass, and then there's that person. So your window, the area between your cars, and then their window, right? But we see internet rage all the time. The moment two people disagree with each other on the internet, one of them is a Nazi, the other one is and then boy, it escalates quickly. Within 5 minutes, they're cursing each other out and screaming, and now it's all caps and blah, blah, blah. Why? Because we put a piece of glass in between ourselves. You're not a person. You're just an avatar on a screen that I can talk to any way I want to. And we've lost the ability to communicate. We see this in public with people making eye contact. Come on, Ward. You're old enough to remember when people you would just stop and chat. You're just leaned up against the cabbage bin in the grocery store talking to somebody that you just met 3 minutes ago. You started talking about cabbage, and now you're talking about the grandkids, and you're talking about the car and the ball game, and nobody does that anymore. because everybody is so big. Hold on. I'll get back. And they can't have, I'm interacting with somebody clear on the other side of the planet about something I don't actually care about, right? While there's a real human being standing in front of me with whom I could be interacting, but I don't know how to do that. So if you go to the other side of the store and text me, we can have a conversation.
Well, it's I think all of us can share experiences like that where you have, I think, got a very good analogy there that the glass separation enables people to be rude to each other. And in many, many ways, in fact, the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas just had an article about this and said that really what the society is missing is manners. And if we just had more civility and manners, but I guess following the logic you and I are exploring here, the abstraction developed by these things we have available to us to communicate have really rendered manners irrelevant in many ways, because you're not interpersonal relating on a, and this leads to another question I've been holding back here. It's come in, to what extent, and this is kind of a scary question because it's exponential, I guess, you can extrapolate or whatever's the word. Are we going to be subservient to artificial intelligence in the future because it keeps growing and we keep diminishing? I see that graph. Am I wrong on that, Mitch?
No, I don't think you are wrong. So, I don't know that it's going to come down to the Terminator, okay? But I don't think it has to come down to the Terminator. I think that the more we become dependent on technology to do things that we used to know how to do and we're able to do. So I'm going to take something really, really simple because we're talking about social interaction here. So let's keep this to social interaction for a second, because that's something that, okay, maybe you have viewers and listeners that were never able to, I don't know, change their own oil. So they don't care that they don't know how to change their oil now, right? That's something fathers used to teach sons, but then we started, Jiffy Lube or whatever. Okay, there's an easier way to do this. Maybe some of those things, but we all live in a world where there are other people. Because, well, no, I can safely say that because hermits aren't listening to your show. So, okay, we're good. We all live in a world. Everybody listening to this lives in a world where you interact with other people, right? And today, if I do explode all over you on Facebook, right? Facebook's algorithm is going to catch that. Or you're going to click the report button and the technology is going to block me from doing that again. I don't hold myself accountable. A person doesn't actually hold me accountable. I am unable to continue screaming at you because I got put in Facebook jail. If I tweet something I oughtn't have tweeted, whether it's something I really actually oughtn't have tweeted or not, or it's just something the masters don't like, I don't know, like a year ago, Hunter Biden's laptop, right? If I tweet something like that, it's just never going to show up. The algorithm is going to stop that for me. Consequently, if I fall into that trap, and I'm just using myself as an example, I could very easily forget how to mind my own manners, how to treat other people as other people, how to treat other people as also being made in the image of God as a human person, right? So the problem that we come into there is that the technology is artificially doing for me what I used to have to do for myself. And it's the same thing with memory. Come on, Ward, you used to remember everybody's phone number. You reached over on the wall, you pulled off the phone. Oh, and look, I'm making a dialing because we're old, right? We actually dialed numbers. We didn't even push buttons. But you take the phone off and you'd be like, oh, I need to call Bill. And you just dial Bill's phone number and then Bill would answer the phone. How many people's phone numbers do you know right now? Off the top of your head, if you really had to think about, like, how many numbers could you just dial from a phone that is not your mobile phone?
Well, even numbers more. There's so many numbers. Let's throw them in the pile too.
Well, let's throw them in the pile. But the thing is, I don't have to remember people's phone numbers because I touch a picture of their face on my screen, and it automatically dials them. Right? I don't have to remember their numbers. I don't actually have to remember their names as long as I've got their picture. Right? And so we have forgotten how to do that. I used to know everybody's phone number. I knew the phone numbers of the businesses that I called on a regular basis. And if I didn't, I knew how to use the phone book and look it up. Right now, nobody remembers anything. We don't remember how to do this or how to do that because we've got it all artificially remembered for us by a device that, man, if you drop your phone in a water puddle tomorrow, you're gonna have a bad few days.
That's true. Listen, we're going to run out of time. It's been great talking with you, Mitch, and hope we can do this again sometime in the future. Just check in and kind of have a chat like this and let our listeners
Absolutely
share what we come up with. And we've got a lot of topics, but this has been a fascinating topic, and it's been on a lot of people's minds. And I've learned a lot today. And when I went to get my coffee heated up, I said to my wife, "Unplug Alexa."
There you go. Get rid of that thing, man. You can live without it. You don't need that.
Yeah, unplug Alexa. I don't need to ask you to play Hank Williams Jr.
If your listeners want to know more about my podcast or just take a deeper dive into how they can protect their privacy, I'm actually doing a whole series right now on my podcast of how to de-Google your life, starting with your web browser and your search engine, your email provider, all these different things. And I'm just going to go down the rabbit trail for as many episodes as that takes. My podcast is called Enemy of the Surveillance State. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, so be sure to check it out. And if you like it, subscribe. That way you get notifications when I put up a new episode.
Well, if you send us a link, we'll put it up on the site here.
I'll do it.
Yeah, send us a link and we'll put it on the website. Okay, we're talking to Steve Mitchell Shaw, whom I call Mitch, and is a great conversationalist, has a lot of expertise and a lot of things, writes for the New American and has his own podcast, and we've enjoyed talking with him. We've enjoyed you tuning in. Of course, we'll be out on various platforms in a minute. WardscottFiles.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all that business. So we're trying to spread the word, and you're helping us by supporting us. So, Mitch, have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Warthog Command Center out.